Yeah, well, let's dig in. Hello, everybody. I'm David Cooks, and I tell you what, paralysis can take on many, many forms. It can be physical like mine, or it can be psychological.
You can do anything you put your mind to. What seems impossible can be done by you.
And what we try to do is feature stories that go from difficult places to fulfilling purpose.
It may knock you down, but don't let it stop you. Got so much to give, a lot of life to live. You must go from paralysis to purpose.
You're in for a treat today.
Yeah, paralysis to purpose. Oh, paralysis to purpose.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. I'm your host, David Cooks, and let me just take a moment and thank you for subscribing to our YouTube channel, also sharing this podcast, giving us a like or two. That helps us. And if you have time, give us a review. I am humbled by the favor that Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, has been given. We have guests here that I think are second to none, from Damon West to our guest tonight, who you're going to find out about shortly. We don't take this for granted, and hopefully you enjoy the stories that they bring. I get to talk to some of the most inspiring and intriguing people on the planet, and today is no exception. Today we have Dr. Kyle Daigle with us, all the way from Louisiana. Do you eat crawfish?
Yeah, I eat crawfish.
Okay, then. We might have to work something. I used to get them shipped up all the time from Louisiana Crawfish Company and have crawfish boils. I haven't done that in a while, but we may get back on that. But anyway, let me give you some of his resume. He is a distinguished healthcare professional from, as I mentioned, from Louisiana. He also was a college baseball player at McNeese State University. He's become a renowned figure worldwide, mind you, in the field of functional neurology. He also does chiropractic care and mind-body health treatment, I guess, is the only way I can say that. We'll get into a lot of that later on. What was so interesting to me about him was his commitment to helping to treat people with spinal cord injuries. And for those of you who have listened to the podcast, that I've had one almost 45 years ago, and the things that he's talking about today, I never heard about back then and really haven't heard that much about recently. But it's there now, and there's opportunities to really help the quality of people's lives and what he's doing. He's international in everything he does, from lecturing to speaking. He has patients from over 60 countries that fly into his clinic in Louisiana. He's worked with Olympic athletes, professional sports figures, celebrities, and just everyday Joes who come and are in need of what he can do for them. As I mentioned, he's an author. He has two books out. One is called What If You Knew, and the second one is called Out Speaking Autism. And so he has a lot of things he's passionate about. The thing that I think is most impressive to me is his heart to serve and his heart to reach people. He's having an impact in the world that I think is second to none. So let me just welcome Dr. Daigle to the program today.
Thank you, David. Look, hey, I'm here. I'm here to serve. I'm here to teach. I'm here to basically share what I know and hopefully out there inspire someone out there that there's potentially another way.
Give us a little bit of your background coming up in your childhood and that kind of stuff. And then we'll go from there into how you really got interested in science and medicine.
So I think it all starts really back to the probably second most important person in my life outside of my wife and kids, but my mom. My mom was actually born with a disability, pretty severe. My grandmother actually literally was 6 months sick, and she was on these medications. And after 6 months, they decided to actually check her, see if she's maybe pregnant, and find out that she was pregnant. And she was on medications that impact the actual nervous system. So my mom had to have 30 plus procedures for some of the neurological issues she had. And so my mom meets my dad, and basically they told my mom she's probably never going to have kids. So I'm actually an infertility baby. My mom had to actually work to have me, basically all the drugs, all the stuff to have me. And so when I was in the womb, my mom prayed to God that I would come out hopefully as a normal child. And what happened is I did not. I came out a super sick child, chronically sick. I actually went to the doctor so many times that my dad jokes around that the doctor actually literally wouldn't even take the copay because I was in and out of there. I was basically had learning disabilities. I had a speech impediment. I was actually pigeon-toed so bad I had to wear my shoes on the opposite feet.
I've never heard anything like that. I was like,
Oh man, look, hey, well, I'm from Louisiana, so you go to these doctors, you never know. But literally, what happens is, look, man, I was so fast as a kid. I literally played in a pee-wee football game, and I played running back, and I take off running, and I break away, and right before the goal line, I tripped on my own feet, and I fell right before actually making a touchdown. And I remember people are like, "Man, how could you do that?" I was so pigeon-toed, man, that I literally caught my foot and fell. I'll never forget that. I was probably like 9 years old when this happened. My mom had a disability. My brother actually had a disability. But my mom always told us that you never let this disability define you. And that's right there, man, is that was probably the most foundational principle that I could have grown up with was basically, even though you're a little different, you walk pigeon-toed, you don't talk normal, don't worry what other people think about you. My mom is my foundation, man. What happened to me as a child is when I went to a parent-teacher conference and my mom told me to stand outside the door, and I wanted to hear what the teacher was going to tell my mom. And I did. I went and listened to the teacher, and she told my mom, she said, your son's just not a normal kid. And you should just accept that. You should just accept that your kid's always going to be a little different. And she was talking about my speech, on how my speech, I didn't speak properly. I spent years in speech therapy, and he's probably always going to have an issue. And I remember sitting there and I told myself, I was like, that woman doesn't know who I am. And I was like, and one day I'm literally going to speak in front of literally the world, in front of thousands of people.
I want to go back to your mom. Could you talk about how significant your mother was to you, how your mom decided she wanted to become a teacher? Talk about that a little bit, because I think it's important. It looks like your lineage of serving started before you. And what does that mean when your mom decided to be a teacher and the kind of students that she was going to work with?
So my mom is, I'm telling you, man, she is the definition of an angel. She just has the hugest heart and passion. And so I just remember what happened is she got tired of staying home. My dad had a very successful company. She just couldn't stay home. And so she decided to literally go put her heart out. And she had a crazy passion for kids with Down syndrome. And so she told my dad, she said, hey, I'm not staying home. I'm going to go to work. And really, she just wanted to help these kids because she was a kid that actually got made fun of. And she wanted to serve these kids. She wanted to let these kids know that they were super important, even though maybe they have physical differences, but they still had the same heart. My mom literally would take these kids from her school. She would go pick them up. And she would take my brother and I, and we would go to the park. And we would actually play with kids with Down syndrome at the park. And she told us, she was like, you're literally going to treat these kids just like they're your brother. And it was awesome because we learned as a very early child that people looked at other people with disabilities different. Mm-hmm. And my mom wanted us to know that those kids were no different than us. And really what she was really wanting us to do is to start, basically because my mom did not like bullies, because she was bullied. And she wanted us to actually start learning how to stick up for these kids, because sometimes these kids might not have been as strong as the other kids. And so that's what I become. I gravitate to kids that have disabilities because, one, I grew up in this. I had a disability. I got put on methamphetamines. So that's the ADHD medication. And I was already hyperactive, which means really they should have been giving medications to calm me down. Instead, what happened is it made me have an addiction, and that addiction was reading. And I started reading encyclopedias literally as early as second grade. And I have a crazy photographic memory. I memorize everything. And so I took this passion into actually discovering I wanted to be a pediatric oncologist, wanted to be a cancer doctor. Mm-hmm. So if at second grade you asked me, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, I was going to be a pediatric oncologist all the way up until I actually went into college.
The fact that your mother was able to take all of the ingredients of your situation, her disability, your disability, the kids with Down syndrome, and turn that into a formula of appreciation and service is amazing. A lot of people get angry and bitter, and they can't figure out how to use the thing that is in their life for the betterment of other people. Kudos to your mom. Were you a good baseball player?
Yeah, I played. I was pretty dang good. I was actually a quarterback in a high school. I was super fast. Now, my only thing is I had some inconsistency with my eyes, but you couldn't hit a ball past me. and I had a freaking cannon of an arm, but I was inconsistent with hitting, which my cousin is Casey Daigle. He went and played, he was a first round draft pick for the Arizona Diamondbacks. My dad was a phenomenal baseball player. My youngest brother went and played college baseball too. So I come from a pretty athletic family.
So I'm assuming you got your feet straightened out.
Yeah, I still have a little pigeon toe though, because my dress shoes, if I wear them long enough, I'll get a little.
So you walk like a baller. That's what you do.
I do. That's it, man. I got the strut.
Oh, that's funny.
I got hurt. Then I went to LSU after getting hurt. And I really pursued cancer research. And I got exposed to some very interesting things. One of them was actually sound waves. And that really piqued my interest as how sound could actually do certain cool things. And fast forward, what happened is I decided to actually, because of what I got exposed to, I wanted to go into the alternative field because now I've learned a lot about nutrition. And I don't think that it's properly treated that right way. So I knew I had to go the alternative route. And so I decided to go to chiropractic because in chiropractors, they really study the brain and the spinal cord. And that was something that said, hey, look, my background's in biochemistry. Let me go learn about the brain. And then I can merge that. And so fortunately, I got to be mentored by a guy named Dr. Brandon Brock, who is by far someone I crazy respect. And he started teaching me about traumatic brain injuries. And what I learned about traumatic brain injuries is astronomically crazy. And most people start working on the arms and the leg, but this is the brain. I actually go into private practice, and then I start getting all these autistic kids come see me. And what was interesting is I had no explanation of what was going on with these kids. So I start reading the study. And then fortunately, I was actually able to start training under Dr. Robert Melillo, guy who actually wrote a book called Dyslexia Kids. And he actually published papers over how the left and the right side of the brain work. So I was actually able to no longer become a student where I actually become a lecturer, where I actually started teaching for Dr. Robert Melillo. And I got a chance to travel all over the world with him, teaching in all these really awesome universities and really all these amazing doctors under this technique he developed. Then I started getting these patients what I have today is spinal cord injuries. And one thing that makes me, what I hope the whole world realizes, is that I feel like a lot of times in spinal cord injuries that we see, we mainly focus just on the spinal cord, and people don't realize that the brain itself sends signals down to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord's out through the nerves to the muscles. And what really intrigues me is when you look at the statistics over spinal cord injuries, that a lot of them are actually from typically motor vehicle or trauma. Mm-hmm. And when you have any type of really displacement of the head, that can actually disrupt something called the vestibular system. And that area is actually going to control what's called the intrinsic muscles that line the spine, and also deals with your extensors in your legs. And that right there is one of the ways that I love treating spinal cord patients, is basically look at the actual brain itself from images. And then I also work on every single individual spinal pathway. My practice is just taken off like crazy. People are flying in from all over the world. And I'm like, it's crazy. I mean, people from Israel, Saudi Arabia, Croatia, Dubai, Sydney, Australia, and people in my community don't even know I even exist, but yet the world is like flying in, and it's crazy.
You talked about how in the locale, you're not as known, but the world knows you. And that says something about the assignment that's on your life. And one of the things about purpose that I always talk about is, first of all, if it's not serving others, it's not your purpose. So we'll just start with that. And then secondly, purpose is always greater than you. And once you realize that, there's no limit. There really literally is no limit to what can happen and what you can do.
Once you find that why, and I know you know that because you teach on that, but once you find that why, that right there is where that passion burns. And that's what happened to me literally second grade. I'm going to be a doctor and I'm going to change the world. And that passion has never changed. And now it's so amazing because I'm actually being rewarded in this crazy amount of favors, so big that we can't even contain it. It's so big. No matter what you have going on in your life, but when you truly find that passion and that purpose you have, and for me, it's not basically about building me, it's about building you. It's about building other people. Once I got in alignment with saying, basically, God used me as a vessel. And then guess what happened? That vessel right there went in, boom. Next thing you know, I'm in Barcelona, Spain. I'm in Tel Aviv University. I'm in Sydney. I'm in Dubai. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. It's crazy what happened. And I'm sitting here. My life took off.
You already knew at second and third grade that this is what you were going to do. You were going to impact lives. And I just think that's remarkable. It's some of us don't find out what we're supposed to do until much later in life, and that's okay too. This reading thing really is interesting to me. So you got addicted to reading.
Crazy addiction.
That's so you had ADHD, you said, I think.
Yep.
And
ADHD.
and you say your eyes give you a little.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my eyes move so fast. People that know me, when they taught me lecture, you ask me a question, my eyes move so fast. My brain works incredibly fast. It's like a filing cabinet. I memorize everything. And then everything goes in this filing cabinet. And you could ask me literally anything. You can ask me about, today I did a lecture on irritable bowel syndrome.
I was going to ask you about that because some of the things you talk about with your red light and
Correct.
focusing on gut health, and you talk a lot about gut health. And I said, I wonder if he has something that can help impact the irritable bowel syndrome.
I did a podcast with one of our nurse practitioners. He's a Duke graduate in our Atlanta office. I always joke with him because when I work with patients, I always go to this Duke gut brain video because there's a phenomenal video that Duke actually published over the gut brain connection. It's 2 minutes and 3 seconds. And what it does is it shows you the animation of how when you absorb food or when you get exposed to pathogens on how they can actually infiltrate the gut lining and impact the actual brain. Because when you look at like Parkinson's disease, there's actually a precursor where they typically have some sort of inflammatory bowel or they have constipation. And what happens is it's not treated basically for 10 years. And then all of a sudden now it manifests into a neurological disorder like Parkinson's. So what happened to me is today I was teaching people about irritable bowel syndrome. And this, to give you an example, I had a guy today that he's 37 years old who had a colonoscopy bag. And he's like on all these, he's got Crohn's and ankylosis AS in his back, and no one knows. And I was telling him, which again, I running labs, and I'm like, hey, look, I'll tell you a secret. I actually found that the sinus, there's something called the sinus gut brain connection. And I find now that people that do all these diet modifications, that take all these supplements and their stomach still doesn't change, a lot of times what happens is they actually have what's called nasal dysbiosis. They have abnormal bacteria in their sinuses that repopulate into the gut. And boom, this was actually, and when this guy started talking, he's, man, it's so crazy. I actually literally was like wheezing and I had allergies and all this stuff happening. And it lasted for 6 months. And I took some allergy medication and some sort of nasal spray and it went away. And but then I started developing these GI issues that were like debilitating to where I literally had to have the colonoscopy bag put in.
The gut is like your
second brain.
So important, right? And so you've learned to deal with the brain and the gut and the spine. So we're going to get to all of this. This is so fascinating to me because I've had my share of interactions with doctors and I don't want to be on prescriptions. And some of the stuff you're talking about, I never hear about. We're going to talk about that. You mentioned a brain tumor that you had.
I actually had a traumatic brain injury. So I literally was assaulted in 2013. One of my really good friends just graduates dental school. He and I basically go hang out. Next thing you know, I'm covered in blood. I wake up and I'm in an ambulance in a stretcher. And I just remember waking up and I was like last thing I remember is talking to my friend about him graduating dental school, what his life's going to be like. And literally now I'm with the EMTs and they were like, I'm like, what happened? And I see blood. I'm like, did I get shot? They were like, you were assaulted. And I'm like, assaulted? By who? They were like, we don't know. We found you unresponsive. We had to do CPR on you, put you in a stretcher. You didn't move. You were actually unresponsive for a couple of minutes. And I'm like, what in the world? And I had no recollection after this besides the next day, my brother, who's actually a nurse practitioner, my phone's ringing. He's, dude, what the heck happened to you? And I have no clue. And then after that turned me into the most debilitating vertigo you can ever imagine. I was actually throwing up 13 times a day. I developed what's called dysautonomia. So I was actually passing out upon standing and I was still trying to practice. I was driving down the road having to stop and throw up. It was horrible. But one of those things is that I got a little mad about what happened. But what happened is everything that really happened to me, really, it was something that I overcame it, which is really awesome. But now what happens is that when I work with patients, I can sit down with you because I had ADHD, I had a speech impediment, I had learning disabilities, I had allergies as a kid, I had a traumatic brain injury, and then also I end up having a severe fungal infection that I beat. So I went through all these things, and that's a big demographic of people that I have. So it's not, I'm coming from a doctor who memorizes everything, but I also literally was in the opposite shoes where I was actually the patient's perspective, doing all the research, trying to figure out how I can actually turn into at least somewhat of a normal person.
Wow. So all of those things that you went through, and here we go with another life lesson. It's not for you only. All that stuff gave you like you said, a broader spectrum of people that you could now empathize with than you would have been able to do otherwise.
Yeah, man, that was it. The greatest comebacks come from the greatest setbacks.
Yeah. So before we take a quick break, I want you to talk a little bit about, we quickly went through your story, but you left out some things that are pretty important because sometimes I think people, they see us now and sometimes they don't know the struggle and the questions and the anger and the normal process. And I call it grieving because it's really dealing with loss. That traumatic experience was a loss for you that you had to deal with. And you go through all the different phases of it. And you were at a breaking point. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share the story, man. What happened to me is that I had a pretty solid life. I come from a very good family. Everything that you could ever imagine, I had, or at least my parents had. And I had this brain injury and I was miserable 6 months, man. I had MRIs, CT scans, telling people I had anxiety, depression. And so actually, man, I got involved in alcohol, and which was not good. But I was sedating myself to go to sleep at night because I had like crazy paranoia and I was suicidal. I literally knew exactly what I was going to do. I got to that component. And what happened is I literally one night, I sat down and I literally prayed to God, and I was pretty mad at him. And I told him, I was like, look, man, if I don't wake up tomorrow morning, this is going to be it for me. And the wildest thing, because every morning what I would have to do is I would actually have to literally wake up and I would have to roll sideways. And then I would take me about 5 minutes just to be able to sit up, and then I would throw up or I would pass out on the floor. And so what I did is I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. This is straight every day for 6 straight months. And this is what's crazy is that next day when I woke up, I sat straight up. I stood up, no dizziness, not passing out. And I was like, all right. And now I have chills telling you a story because that moment there, I was like, all right. There's something here for me to do. I went through this whole thing. What is it? And this actually was very interesting about this because I know all about the brain. How I actually recovered, and goes back to what you just mentioned about irritable bowel, is I'm from Southwest Louisiana where we eat fried food and boudin and cracklins and gumbo. And what happened is I end up running some labs on myself and actually found out that I had a gluten sensitivity. And so gluten is actually in all the foods that I was eating. I completely removed gluten out of my diet, and my entire equilibrium, my entire life, my allergies, my eczema, all that went away from literally removing one food. 6 months of literally throwing up and being dizzy nonstop. And so that's whenever my 80-20% success rate went up crazy high, because then I started running labs on patients. And what we're finding out is because of all the antibiotic usages and stuff like that and diet that we eat, it's actually changing our gut microbiome, literally all the healthy stuff in our gut. And what's very common after seeing like a head injury or even a spinal cord injury or even infection is that people can get what's called intestinal permeability, which is actually known in layman terms as a leaky gut. Our gut has a barrier. And what happens is if we have a head injury, the vagus nerve that controls rest and digest can actually get weak. And then boom, it loses the neurological control to the GI. So our GI kind of opens up. And then anything, undigested food, any type of bacteria, virus, mold, parasitic infections, all that stuff can now seep in. And then that's actually one of the starting causes of potentially autoimmune diseases. And yeah, so that was basically what changed my life, is basically literally one was prayer. And the second thing after that was after I started looking at how to make a full recovery with running some labs. And that made it to where my irritable bowel and everything went away. And yeah, man, now I know a lot about a lot of things with when it pertains to brain and gut health and the immune system and all that.
That's a great story. It's also a great place for us to take a quick break. And when we come back with Dr. Daigle, we're going to dig into some of his treatment. I want to hear about these lasers and different things that he does, especially with his spinal cord injured patients, because I've got a special interest in that. We'll be right back after this short break on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast.
We hope you're enjoying Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Paralysis to Purpose for more updates. Also, check out David's website at davidcookspeaks.com to learn more about his mission and purchase his book, Getting Undressed: From Paralysis to Purpose.
Welcome back to Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast. I'm your host, David Cooks, along with our guest today. I can hardly talk. I'm so excited. Dr. Kyle Daigle. I want to spend some time in this part of the podcast talking about some of the treatment that you do, the red light, laser type stuff. And because you talked about the connection between the brain and the spinal cord and the stomach and all those things. And you really do enjoy working with spinal cord patients. That's one of the things you really have talked about. And can you walk us through just some of the basic treatments that you do, how that works? And then, but before that, you told me something that you had a chance when we talk about why you're doing what you're doing, you had a choice to make. You come from a very successful family, you have a family business that you could have stepped right into, but that was not the plan that God obviously had for you. Can you just share a little bit of that with the audience, and then we'll get into your treatment?
Yeah. Yes, my family, my dad owned a very successful oil company, and what was very interesting, it was a family-owned company, and so my dad actually was brothers, and then my dad actually gets the company, and I was at a time point where I was deciding basically if I was going to continue pursuing this or I was going to go work for my dad. And what happened was I asked God to basically, if this is what I'm going to do, I needed one thing. I want him to take me to Jerusalem. And really amazing thing happened is I actually got an opportunity to go to Barcelona to lecture, and I get off the stage of that, and then I get an opportunity to actually teach at Tel Aviv University, which I didn't know where Tel Aviv University was. I actually looked it up, and I was able to get a trip to Jerusalem. And literally that, as soon as I finished up, I call my wife. I'm like, Alexa, which is my wife's name. I'm like, you're never going to guess what happened. And she's what I was like, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. And she's, you're in Barcelona. I'm like, no, I'm literally going to go to Jerusalem. And she's, wow. And I got a chance to actually go to Jerusalem. And this was the craziest thing is I went to this coffee shop. And so I told everyone that I had a brain injury in 2013. And what happened is I gave my life back to Jesus and started going to church. But what happened is I always felt like I had maybe a hard time making decisions. So I basically did this. I took the number 13, I flipped it around to 31. And so I said, you know what, God, because we're all born on a certain day and I believe in numbers. So I said, all right, God, if you can give me an answer, because I have a hard time distinguishing right and wrong, I need you to see it. I'm going to claim it. So number 31. And that's basically when I flipped my life around. I was like, that means yes. That means you're there. That means that I need to go for it. You're there for me. You're protecting me. Do it. And I'm at this coffee shop, and the lady's, would you like to sit inside, outside? And I was like, outside. She goes, all right, go outside and sit at table number 31. And I'm on Mount Olive, and I go sit down at this table, and I take a picture because it was so beautiful, because you literally out in the periphery, you can actually see the actual gates of Jerusalem. And that was whenever it was like, all right, God, this is definitely what I'm going to do. This is my mission. I know you're there, and just use me as a vessel. And I basically got into the prayer of Jabez, asking God to expand my territory. And that he did. And again, 68 countries flying to see me. I'm opening up a location actually in May in Dubai, another one potentially in London, and another one in Sydney, Australia. And it's just taking off. And it goes back to, once you really get in alignment for what basically we have our purpose, it's the cup overflows. The blessings and the favor are so large. But yet, even in my local community, man, people don't even know. The Uber drivers, when my patients fly in from like Belgium, and they're like, hey, I need to go see Dr. Daigle. They're like, who? They're like, Dr. Daigle. And they're thinking that everyone in my town knows who I am. And then the Uber driver, the guys are like, are you the real deal? The Uber driver doesn't know you. And I'm like, no, man, people in my community don't know I exist, but the world does.
Your stories are just amazing. So now let's talk about some of the treatment that you do. I know 45 years ago, the conversation was, these are all the things you will never do again. And that was the beginning of your recovery, which I thought was so bizarre, because I didn't believe all that anyway, but that's what I would call, they would try to get you out of shock so you could understand realistically what it is they thought your life was going to be like. You are saying that's not necessarily the case. How do you manage what is real versus the reality that you see?
Yeah. So this is what happens to me, is that one is their power in the tongue is super huge. Life or death is actually in that. And I have seen patients on hospice that were told they were going to die. And they literally, like one of my cases I posted on social media, literally had 3 days to live, literally had his funeral planned the following week. And I remember this. I walked into the room and I had asked this guy's name was Michael. And I said, Michael, do you want to die? And he says, heck no, man. I have a beautiful girlfriend. I've just built a beautiful back porch. I have 2 lovely kids. And the doctors are telling me that, I have this fungal infection. I'm in liver failure. I have blood clots all over, and there's nothing else they can do. And the crazy thing is, man, for me, I believe in divine intervention for one. And 2, I think that science has its limitation. And I don't think doctors need to put expiration dates on people. And that's basically what we talked to him about. And what happened is I got this guy to start talking about thinking about the future. And the crazy thing is that the brain doesn't know what's real and what's not, because I do virtual reality. I can put you in a virtual world and I can see crazy things happen, but you have no awareness of what's going on. And so that's right there, is like I saying, is watching this guy. This guy's now running a construction company 2.5 years later. He actually helped me build new plans for my home that I'm building. And he's walking, he's living, he's cooking barbecue, traveling all over. And I watched this guy defeat the odds. But what happened is, that guy actually heard all this horrible prognosis from the doctors, and he accepted it for a while until he came into my realm. And my realm is very different, man. It is very spiritual. It's faith-based. I don't believe in negativity. But what happens is I do believe that in neuroplasticity, which is that the brain is plastic. The brain can evolve and it can develop and it can regrow new neurons and networks outside of what traditional neuroscience says. I see it clinically, and there's research that supports it. But the problem is that no one is specifically really, truly treating the brain from the different aspects that I am, from literally all 5 senses: smell, taste, sound, colors, even actually closing the eyes, because where your awareness go, energy follows. And we live in a life that's full of distractions. And so I get people to actually close their eyes. And I get people to actually project where they want to go and do things. And the crazy thing is my job is to figure out what's not working in the brain and in the body and start stimulate them. And when I have them in this kind of visual environment they want to be, and it's really wild to see some of the connections, like a little toe will flicker. But really, to answer a lot of these questions about the science that I do, is that people have to understand that I'm not just a chiropractor and I'm not just a researcher or an alternative medicine doctor. I literally studied everything. And one of my big things is that I love physics. And I love Albert Einstein, E=mc², which is what we're talking about, the red light. And I love Nikola Tesla. Light, sound, and vibration are keys to the universe. And that's basically what I use. And so let's break this down. So red light is amazing. So I tell people this: an animal never needs a veterinarian until he comes inside. And once he comes inside, that animal starts to get sick. And you have to think about this, is that what does the cat do inside the house? It's going to go to the windowsill to actually get light exposure. And so literally, it's just crazy. There's something called the circadian rhythm. Basically, God creates the sun, and it's super powerful. The sun literally makes plants grow. It helps improve all of our vegetation. But yet we don't get exposed to the sun, but very little. But what the sun does is it has these crazy amounts of color. So when you break Albert Einstein's equation, energy equals mass. When you break mass down, and again, I'm a very simplistic, logical person, mass into every single cell of the body times c², the speed of light. And as a human being, 98% of us are only being exposed to one color, and it's blue, because we live inside. We're in front of computer screens. We're in front of these artificial lights. We're in cubicles. We're in schools. We're in big work environments. We're not outside. And you can actually feel the difference between being outside versus being inside. But guess what happens? If you get sick and you go outside, guess what's happening? You're going to actually increase your vitamin D levels. Or you might even start to perspire. Your skin is your largest organ. So you actually literally start sweating all this inflammation. And then you go to the beach. All of a sudden, you feel like the best you ever felt in the beach, because you get something called beta endorphins from being in the sun. And that what really got me into actually studying red light, is because red light has awesome potential benefits. It improves blood flow. It reduces inflammation. It can actually activate what's called angiogenesis, which is actually how literally like our blood vessels actually regrow. It activates something called nitric oxide. Our arteries open up, get way more blood flow. And then it also can even activate your endorphins. It can actually make you feel good. And actually, beta endorphins literally mimic morphine to dampen pain. And then also we get our sleep cycle. So everyone in the world here now has insomnia because one is that people are taking all these sleep medications, but doctors aren't teaching you that. And so when you start looking at the spine for spinal cord rehab, the research shows that you really have to improve blood flow to the actual area of the spine to actually bring the nutrients and to also start making nerves fire and function. So the amazing thing is that you can actually put red light to the actual spine, the area that's traumatized, to actually improve blood flow. Now, I'm going to take it another step higher, is that I got into studying specific frequencies. And frequencies is if you're speaking Chinese and I'm speaking Arabic, we're both talking, but we're not going to understand what's going on. But yet, if we're both speaking Chinese or Arabic, now we can actually know exactly what we're saying. And that's how the body works, is that we literally, the frequencies, our bodies work off a different frequency. When you get sick, you have low energy, but all of a sudden, like me, I have crazy amounts of energy. I'd never get sick. I tell people this, when COVID happened, I literally could have walked around with no mask and literally like walked up and actually hugged every single COVID patient and I wouldn't have got COVID. And the reason is because one is I know a lot about the immune system. And two is that I get exposed to red light and I'm outside in the sun all the time. So my vitamin D levels are crazy high. So back to my circle, because I'm ADHD, but when I actually put patients who have spinal cord injuries, what I do is not only do I put red light to the actual area of the spine, I also put it on arteries that are going to start supplying different networks in the brain. Because what happens is if you see a red light panel and you put your hand in front of it, your veins and arteries are going to start to dilate. You start seeing them on your actual hand and stuff. And it's wild. So red light, because your arteries have a light receptor.
So is this red light just like I can go get a red light bulb red light, or is it a special red light?
It's special. So red LED lights. Yep. So there's different, there's basically, they're called nanometers. So you start off with 630 nanometers is where some of the red light panels start, up to about 690, maybe a little higher than that. But those are actually some pretty good wavelengths. And really all you have to do is if you look at the actual color spectrum and you look at the red wavelength, it'll show you exactly what the nanometers of red light are. And then you have something called infrared, which are deeper penetration. Sometimes you can actually, they're invisible in some of these red light or infrared lights. And these things actually penetrate deeper into the actual skin. These things have been shown in research, actually, they even almost penetrate to the bone. And so when we start doing laser therapy or photobiomodulation, that's called, on the cranium, on the head, we'll actually use an infrared because an infrared is going to penetrate deeper. And in a lot of people that are skeptical about the stuff, how come there's difference between red and infrared? Infrared is actually a deeper penetrated wavelength that's going to actually penetrate the actual scalp. But this is what's very interesting about research and lasers, is that you don't just have a primary, meaning that just because I put a laser here doesn't mean that this is the only area. Lasers are going to have something called a primary, which is when you laser, then you're going to have a secondary, you're going to have something called a tertiary, and you're also going to get even a quaternary. So you're going to get literally 4 different levels of impacts from using red light.
And when you talked about trauma on the spinal cord, does that include a severed spinal cord? Is that all trauma on the spinal cord?
Whole spinal cord, because one of the things that's interesting after a spinal cord injury is you have a primary, which is basically the trauma that happens, and you have a secondary. And research shows that the primary is considered irreversible and the secondary are reversible. But when you look at the research behind primary and secondary, there's a lot of inflammatory markers, inflammation markers that come up. And one of the things that I think that people need to look at with spinal cord recovery is vagus nerve stimulation. Because the vagus nerve, it actually literally innervates your arteries. And remember, if you improve blood flow, you improve function. Again, people are looking at the spinal cord as the only area to look at, but then what about all the other factors like inflammation? So that's where gut health comes from. That's where nutrients come from, like fish oils or EPA, DHA, omega-3s. Or you can also even start stimulating what's called the auricular branch to either enhance basically the way that our blood supply. So if I have someone, for example, has like an oxygen saturation level of 92%, which is not good, I can actually put a laser directly over the carotid artery, and then I can take this person from like a 92, 94 to sometimes even 97, 98% oxygen saturation.
So let me try to understand what you just said, because it sounds like you are able then to treat and probably help prevent clotting and all of that type of stuff without having to have an invasive surgery. Is it fair to say that?
Yeah, this is the thing is that I come in from looking at neuroanatomy, neurochemistry, neurocircuitry, and then understanding biochemistry. And I think that the challenging in healthcare is that we have such brilliant doctors that have been trained to isolate and become compartmentalized. And no one's actually looking at the big picture. You have to go see a rheumatologist, a cardiologist, a nephrologist, a neurologist, a pulmonologist, a gastroenterologist, orthopedic doctor. We're not all working together. But you know what? The body literally is a whole holistic system. It is a whole system. And so when you start to compartmentalize something, what if something else on the other side is impacting this? And that's where, for me, I just went from actually like studying the whole thing. And that's the cool thing about alternative practitioners is that we are taught into this methodology to actually look at the whole body as a whole.
This is around the world, and people are learning about it. And you're training people, and you talked about, 150 locations in the U.S.?
We have about 153 locations around the world. And then my laser company, Neurosolution, we probably have, I'd say we probably have close to 1,500 plus lasers that are out there throughout the world in clinics all over the world.
This is such exciting news. There are people that need to know that there's another option. So with your spinal cord injuries, what is the greatest testimony you have working with someone that had a spinal cord injury?
All right. So I just recently posted a video of a guy named Ben. Ben was from outside of New Orleans. He was pressure washing his father-in-law's boat, and he was wearing flip-flops, and he tripped over the water hose, and he landed on the actual one of the poles for the seats that go onto the boat. The seat was off. He lands on it and he's a T10 Asia A quad. And fortunately, when he was in the hospital, one of the, I think it was a nurse practitioner, she told him, she was like, hey, I know this really smart guy who I went to LSU with. He's doing some kind of unorthodox kind of things. But I know he's really smart, but he's doing a bunch of like red light therapy. And she's like, you should look him up. They did. They came to see me. And this guy's, again, Ben, he has, and I asked him, I said, so what did the doctor say? He said, man, I'm not going to walk again. Welcome to my new friend. And I told him, I said, well, that what you want to do? And he said, heck no, man, I want to walk my daughter down the aisle. And I said, look, let's go make that happen. And he looked at me, dude, don't joke around with me. And I'm like, no, dude, my background's in TBI rehab and you have a spinal cord injury. I help people with brain injuries, people that just come out of comas, or little kids that have drowned, or people that have been crushed by a horse. I've been able to help these people actually walk again. I just got to rewire networks in the brain with all this stimulation. I said, well, look, time tells. As long as we repetitively do this stuff, the brain's plastic and the spinal cord, we can actually start trying to build. I said, I might not be able to get everything back, but we can get something. So I told him, I said, let's go to the back. But what happened is before I did all this stuff, I did an evaluation just like I do on every patient of mine with spinal cord injuries. And I wrote what's called a QEG of the brain. And there's an area in the top part of the brain called the motor strip. And there's a pathway from the motor strip called the corticospinal. So in neurology, everything's connected by an O. So cortex, O, spinal, corticospinal pathway. And that's actually what's going to start sending signals down to your legs and your arms to make you have strength. And what I find is that area, whenever I run images of the brain or run these scans and I look at the brain waves, they're typically really low. Because most of the time there is trauma. And so if you don't use it, you lose it. So when the brain literally sends signals down to the body and it doesn't start getting feedback back, it's going to start thinking that's not there. And what I had found is that you wake the sleeping giant up and you actually start really focusing on the actual motor strip. And so what I basically do is I literally start working on enhancing function to literally the whole pathway from your eyes, your eye movements, your face. If you look at my Instagram, I have pictures. Every single patient has TENS units on their face. People are like, why do you have TENS units on people's faces? I'm like, because I'm actually stimulating the face to activate the pons in the brainstem to facilitate basically the power the brain's going to send down to the spinal cord. And my analogy goes back to, I use analogy of the mountain. What I do is I basically take a snowball. I literally start to snowball on the very top of the hill. And what I do is I push it down. And guess what happens? It gets bigger and it starts gaining way more momentum. And it's a lot easier to basically literally start from something up top and push it down a stream than to actually go from basically from the stream for the body down here and push it back up. But what happens is I work on both aspects. So I'm going to stimulate whatever area has paralysis, but I'm also going to work on from the top down. And that basically is how, on a repetitive basis, with all these red lights, I can actually start to facilitate stronger connections. And then boom, I throw you in virtual reality. And that's where my software company comes into play using NeuroSages, where now we start basically using sound and frequencies and eye movements while we're stimulating your body. And that's how we start turning people's legs and arms and stuff on.
The body is supposed to be able to heal itself. And like you say, we've got it out of balance because of diet and other things. But you've gone back to the body itself. Like we're going to work with the body itself and what it's supposed to do and get it to do that. Just outstanding. I want to ask you about the importance of gratitude. And you've seen a lot. And how has what you've seen impacted you in terms of living from a space or living in a space of gratitude?
Let me tell you this, man. I looked at the 24-hour day that God gave me and I was like, this isn't enough. There's too much to be thankful for. So what happened is I started waking up at 3:45 in the morning and I literally journal. And my gratitude list is extremely, because what happens is this: I work with kids who can't speak. I work with people who can't see, people who've had the worst things. I've watched little girls that have been molested. I've seen some of the most horrific things. And what I literally do, the very first thing that I wake up is I just thank God. One is that I've given a day. The next thing is I go through all my senses, that I can see, that I can hear, I can touch, that I can move. But then what happened is, what I've seen is this, that the more that you basically are grateful for, the more that you're going to basically receive. And what was crazy about this stuff is that the more that I spend in time in gratitude in my notebooks, and I have a library, my office is back here, I have notebooks of just gratitude. And the favor and the blessings that I have received are literally 10x from what I basically write. So at the end of the day, what's really happening from an energetic standpoint is the more that we're grateful for, it actually takes the energy in our body and it basically brings it up. So gratitude is one of the highest stages of enlightenment that our body can actually have.
Hold on. Say that one more time. Gratitude is the highest level of
enlightenment that our body can have. So when you come from a stage of gratitude, your brain is going to be at the highest functioning. It's insane what happens. Because then if you have fear, which is most people get a horrible diagnosis, you can't heal in fear. But what happens is when you become grateful, super grateful, you become at peace. And in stillness and calmness is where it's at. And that actually comes from basically being grateful. And look, I work with people that have had the worst things you can ever imagine. And it's hard for some of these people to be grateful. But the one thing is they still have a heartbeat. Just the sound of a heartbeat, there's still life and there's still a breath. And that person is they're still alive. Someone maybe next door may have lost that opportunity. And just the fact that we get a moment of time, whether it's a second, and that's really the thing is, man, is being grateful for every second, every hour, every day. But it's very interesting. When I literally pray in my morning routine, so I started practice in 2011. I thank God from the very first patient that I actually had in 2011, from literally the whole 12 months to literally 1 week, 2 week, 3 week, 4 week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I thank him for all that. And this is the craziest thing, is that I have never had to advertise and market. My schedule has always stayed booked. And I do no billboards, no pushing magazines. And I'm super grateful. But the more that I've been grateful, the more that I've received. What happens is, for me, is that you're grateful whenever you help someone else out. And when you see that smile, and for me, whenever I'm working on a patient and I see that person smile, I see that toe move, I see that person start tearing up, that right there, man, gets me so juiced up that I wish God gave me 36 hours a day to work.
This will be a great place to transition to asking you about three things that we think are critical on our podcast to go from a place of paralysis to a place of purpose. And by paralysis, we mean anything that keeps you from functioning fully, whatever that might be. And those three things are perspective, perseverance, and partnerships. Could you talk a little bit about what you think about when you hear the word perspective?
Yeah, I think perspective to me turns around and actually finding your outlook in life and your why. And I think that's really the big thing, because that's what's going to get you up to where in the morning you're not going to hit the snooze button. Like, you should never hit the snooze button. Once you truly find your why, that's what's going to give you your motivation, that fire, that drive to basically pursue anything, any obstacle that you get exposed to, and any challenge you may face, because you never know what tomorrow brings.
Do you find that that is a difficult transformation for the patients that you deal with, or are the ones that come to you already in that place?
I would say that 80% of my patients are already there, because they've been following me for typically months, because it takes them some time to be like, is this guy really real? The 20% that I do have to motivate, these are people that basically had a lot of false hope. These are the doctors that told them that you're never gonna move, you're gonna be in this wheelchair, you're gonna die, all these kind of horrible things. I'm going to motivate you like crazy. I'm going to tell you books to read. I'm going to have you do a vision board. We're going to start doing daily affirmations. We're going to try to start talking about visualization, how powerful it is. And I would say that those 20%, I would say that I have about 5% that I'm not able to convert.
That's pretty good. I think what strikes me about that is part of your treatment is with the mind and getting people to think right and speak right and hear right, and all of those sorts of things as part of your treatment. Perseverance.
Oh man, life in general is tough, and not every day is going to be exactly the way we want it. The word that comes to me in my mind is relentless. And I like that term, because if you knock me down, I'm going to get back up. You knock me back down, I'm going to crawl. I'm going to do everything I possibly can to basically not get defeated. And then you go to that term failure. And to me, as I don't believe in failure at all. And what I basically consider failure is opportunities that you learn from. And I think that if you can get that relentless, never give up, that fighter, that warrior. I tell people, I'm a Christian, but I tell people, look, Jesus carried a cross and he kept falling down. He would get back up. They hung him to a cross and he was still trying to hold his head up. And no matter, every one of us, even myself, I've dealt with challenges and struggles and trauma. So no matter who you are, we all have this burden that we carry. And the goal here is to basically carry that cross, but never giving up until that time comes.
Partnerships.
Yes, I think that I would say this, the very first thing about a partnership is you have to have faith in yourself. And then the next thing is that no matter what religion you're, that having a partnership and someone higher than you, so basically something from above. And then it goes down to the surrounding people that you associate yourself with. And if you've dealt with trauma, you really have to watch your inner circle. You can't really be fed negativity. You can't really be looking at other people. It's really basically about who you are as an individual, having faith that you can overcome anything. Other people are going to either feed you and elevate you, or they're going to come in and throw negative and they're going to push you down. And if you want to go up, you can't basically hang out with people that are going to take you down.
I am a Christian also, and what came to mind is that Jesus healed a man in the Bible because of the faith of his friends. And so the people that are around you, they do matter, especially in those situations where you're trying to move forward in the midst of something that's very difficult. One last thing, we didn't get a chance to talk about this, and I know it's important to you. Being a husband and a father, where does that rank on the list of things that you're involved with?
Ooh, it's up top, man. And I'll tell you, this is the challenging thing for me. Before I met my wife, before I got married, I already had an architect notebook for my wife. And I told her, I said, hey, look, this is my vision. This is what I'm going to do. It's not built yet, but I just want to let you know that my passion is to also save the world. And she goes, that's a big vision. And I said, look, I just want to make sure that if we're going to get married and you're going to commit your life to me, that you're okay with me doing this. And so she said, yes. Now I have two beautiful children. And now I'm at a situation to where part of my contract is my family flies with me, which is awesome. And so back in the day, I went and did this stuff by myself, and it was very emotional because you can't do this alone. I'll never forget the day that I was traveling so much. And before I left, my daughter, who's 7 years old, I had my suitcase by the door and she went and kicked it. And because I fly out every Friday, I was flying every Friday. And I saw her and I walked up to her and she's like, I hate when you leave. And it crushed me because I'm going out there teaching other doctors on how to help people out, but yet my daughter was very upset with me. I'm flying back from Houston, Texas, and I just pull over on the side of the interstate, and I'm in tears, man, because I'm like, man, I'm trying to help people out, trying to educate these doctors, but I just watched my daughter just get completely disappointed in me because I'm not home. And so I told my wife, I said, hey, look, we're going to put our daughter into a school that they're going to be lenient. I'm going to start flying you with me. So my family flies with me. Like, we're leaving Friday. I got to go work in London. And my family travels all over the world. My family's very important. And I will tell you this, that every single day, man, and every night, I literally put my hands over my daughter and I pray Psalm 91 over my entire family. And that right there, I put a hedge of protection of them. I love my family. My daughter's 7. My daughter actually, literally on her days that she has like holiday or she's off for school, she comes to work for me. And it is so awesome because my daughter is it's like my mom did with me. Now she'll go in there and she'll actually hold lasers for us. She'll go in there and actually play with the kids that we have. And to me, I'm sitting there watching. It's funny because I have literally some scrubs that say Dr. Daigle for my little daughter. So it's got some scrubs.
That's a great story. All of that was great. For those who may not be billionaires, how can they afford your services? I know it's costly. Is that a barrier? Is there things that people can do?
Man, I've been blessed. So we do lots of ways to help people out. Fortunately, I have families that donate money into the clinic. So we actually sometimes get basically the donations to help provide for families. I actually offer payment plans to families. I have 3 facilities that we help people out. We do home cares where we do virtual calls to help people out. Because insurance considers this stuff pseudoscience, we're not able to take insurance.
That's the reason I was asking. I was like, this is not covered. And I know that there are people that you want to help and that want to get the help you can give them.
As I try to figure out barriers, man, is like, how can I have the biggest reach? And that's where I decided to build a software company called Neurosage, so that way, literally, I can actually deploy software into people's home that they can actually start utilizing this stuff. And so it's $100 monthly subscription for my software program that basically has the audio visual stuff.
So if people want to get a hold of you, what is the best way or ways for them to contact you?
Okay, my clinic is called Neurosolution, Center of Lake Charles. That's where I'm physically at. So the website is www.neurosolutionlc.com. The phone number to that is +1 337 499 3162. That's to actually physically reach me or my practice. And then we also have another location in Atlanta, Georgia with Dr. Ryan Cedarmark, and that's neurosolutionatl.com. And then we have another facility in Austin, Texas, Neurosolution Center of ATX, or Austin, Texas. And then people can actually go to drkyledaigle.com. And I have an Instagram page. I'm pretty active because that's a way I communicate to families all over the world. So I do answer people that message me on direct messaging. We're just here to help change the world and hopefully give hope to people that often may be looked upon as saying, hey, look, man, there's nothing else.
I think you are well on your way to making that happen. A lot of people want to change the world and don't get to do that, but you literally are doing it. So thank you, Dr. Daigle, for being on the podcast today. And before I end, I want to remind our listeners of something you said, and I will paraphrase it and just say that gratitude is a seed. Gratitude is a seed. And the more grateful you can become, the greater the outcomes that you will gain. And I can speak from a lived experience that in the toughest times, I've had to find things to be grateful for and to think about what I did have, not what I didn't have, what I could do, not what I couldn't do, and that the opportunities that were in front of me. So always be grateful. This has been fantastic. We got some science. We got some faith. We got some personal stories. We got a lot of stuff. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I do. Until next time on Paralysis to Purpose, the podcast, I'm David Cooks reminding you that your ability to endure is always greater than your willingness to endure.
Thank you, David.
You can do anything you put your mind to.
Thanks for tuning in to Paralysis to Purpose. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Paralysis to Purpose on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. To purchase his book, visit davidcookspeaks.com. Be sure to tune in next time for more inspiring conversations with David Cooks.
I hope everybody realizes that you have something to give, that your contribution here matters. You came here for a reason. And when it gets hard, when you have a setback, when you get knocked off course, stay the course, because we need you, and you're here to make an impact.
Paralysis to purpose.